Did you know God used a scared man hiding from his enemies to lead just 300 soldiers and defeat an army of thousands? That's the story of Gideon, a man chosen by God in one of the Bible's most incredible underdog victories. The people of Israel had once again turned away from God. So, for 7 long years, God allowed the Midianites to oppress them. Every time Israel planted crops, the Midianites and Amalekites swept in like a swarm of locusts, destroying everything in sight. The Israelites were forced to hide in caves, mountains, and strongholds. Eventually, they cried out to God for help. In a quiet winepress, a man named Gideon was threshing wheat in secret, afraid of being discovered by the Midianites. Suddenly, the angel of the Lord appeared and said,
"The Lord is with you, mighty warrior."
Gideon was shocked. "If the Lord is with us, why has all this happened?" he asked. But God replied, "Go in the strength you have. I will be with you." That night, God gave Gideon a bold mission: tear down his father's altar to Baal and build one for the Lord. Though afraid, Gideon obeyed, but he did it under the cover of darkness. The next morning, the townspeople were furious, but Gideon's father stepped in. If Baal is a god, let him defend himself. Gideon was still unsure. He asked God for a sign, a fleece of wool placed on the ground. "If the fleece is wet with dew and the ground is dry, I'll know you've truly chosen me." And the next morning, it was just as he asked. Still unsure, Gideon asked again, this time for the fleece to be dry and the ground wet. Once again, God answered. Gideon gathered an army of 32,000 men. But God said, "That's too many. If you win, Israel will take the credit." First, God told Gideon to send home anyone who was afraid, 22,000 left. Then God tested them by how they drank water at a stream. Only 300 remained. At night, Gideon crept near the enemy camp and overheard a dream. A loaf of bread tumbled into the camp, destroying it. "That's the sword of Gideon," said a Midianite. Gideon worshipped God. With only 300 men armed with trumpets, torches, and jars, they surrounded the camp. They broke the jars, blew the trumpets, and shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." The Midianites panicked, turned on each other, and fled. God gave Israel the victory. After the victory, the people begged Gideon to rule over them, but he refused. "The Lord will rule over you," he said. Gideon lived in peace for the rest of his life. But after his death, the Israelites returned to their old ways, forgetting the God who had rescued them. Gideon wasn't a superhero. He was fearful, doubtful, and hesitant. But God saw his potential and patiently worked with him. Gideon's story reminds us, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. If you enjoyed the story of Gideon, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more Bible stories like this one. Which part of Gideon's journey spoke to you the most? Drop it in the comments below.